Hey folks, Brad here again. Hope you're all having a great day. Thank you for tuning in. I always appreciate your viewership and your subscriptions, as always, from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for that. To get right to the point, in this video I wanted to, I guess, waylay fears that the Clarity is subject to Honda's oil dilution problem. If you've Googled anything recently on CRVs and SI, the Civic SIs, and I can't remember if the Accord, the base model Accord, comes with the motor that is prone to that. Now, for those of you who don't know, there's an oil dilution problem with the L15B7 Honda engine architecture, and that's a lot of words, but it stands for obviously longitudinal, which is inline, 4-cylinder, 1.5 liter, and B means turbo, and I think 7 has some other iteration which I don't happen to remember, but in those motors, and they attribute it to some high efficiency cooling, etc., etc., that when those cars are driven not hard enough or not long enough, they actually don't get hot enough to burn off some of the residual oil or get fuel condensation, I guess, and being direct injected, it's actually more prone to that, which some of the science of which I remember vaguely, but I'll spare you all now. So what that means, however, though, is, and it's enough of a problem that Honda's issued at least a recall or a technical service bulletin to improve that, because what happens with is the main symptoms are you'll see your oil level increase, which is not something that should happen, as well as you'll get fuel smells in the cabin, and if it gets so far, you'll actually have misfiring and a few things like that. So I was quite concerned about that when I first bought this car, because I didn't hear about that until about 2 months after. So clearly 1.5 liters, you know, some of the similarities are there. I wanted to be sure that my car was not going to be affected. Now, it's still under warranty and all that, but that's a pretty major flaw, and even if they did fix it, how much would it shorten the life of the internal combustion engine? So a few things about the motors. Now, they're clearly both the same displacement, 1.5. They might even share the same block architecture. Like, I believe they're both open deck, and probably share bore centers and a few things like that. They certainly share the same oil capacity, coincidentally or not, of 3.7 liters, including filters. So, you know, you get enough like that, and you say, well, okay, well, I got to make sure that or I want to dig into this more to ensure that my car is not subject to these challenges. And lo and behold, what I've understood is they are not. The Clarity motors, as I say, are not. Partly because I do not believe these things are direct injected. I want to say no 100%, but part of me never wants to be 100%. So I'm going to go with it for now. They're not direct injected, and certainly they're not turbocharged, which is also could be something that would contribute a lot to things like blow-by. Certainly from an oil standpoint, you know, increased boost pressure is absolutely will make that more of a problem. Furthermore, even though these cars, they're an Atkinson cycle, which we all know, they have a static compression ratio of 13.7, but a dynamic ratio of less than that because of the Atkinson cycle and keeping the intake valves open during part of the compression stroke, blah, 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 all the rest of that. The 1.5 turbos, the L15B7s, do not have that high, although they do have a high compression ratio for a turbo of about 10.2 to 10.6, depending on what motor they come in, and up to about 20.8, I think, pounds of boost, which is pretty darn good for that high of a compression ratio in the modern world. So those, like I say, are things that do not affect this car, and that's all good from a research standpoint and you know, Googling and my PhD in Google, like we all seem to have. But more importantly, what waylaid my fears, and I'm hoping it will help waylay yours if you're a Clarity owner like myself, I've done 2 oil changes myself, as in under the car, you know, pulling the crap apart, etc., etc. I did make a video of one, and I've been working on cars for long enough that I'm pretty darn sure I would notice if there was any significant fuel smell in that oil, and there certainly was not. And that's twice now, and even beyond the act of changing the oil and having it come out and spending that time with it, pouring it into their recyclable containers, which I have, and I frankly still have them in the garage. So there has been no separation of fuel, because certainly it's lighter, it would float to the top. There's been no fuel smell, there's been no engine issues at all. So I think I can that's enough points on the graph for me, frankly, or enough evidence, if you will, to be completely comfortable with saying that this motor in this car is not subject to the oil dilution problem. So, hey, good for us that happen to have this. It's very regrettable, because otherwise I think the idea of going to small displacement turboed car motors for, what used to be V6s or bigger, like 2.4 liter 4s, and some of the naturally aspirated Hondas that came before, it's a great idea, but it's a shame that that's such an Achilles heel for these things. I hope the longevity of that turns out to be better than, at least it certainly seems like it right now. So anyway, I appreciate you all for sticking with me for this long. Again, I really just wanted to drive home the point, not only from my PhD in Google, as I always say, but also from having my hands in that oil, and pouring it, handling it, things like that. It's in the garage still. I take it all in bulk to whenever I can take it in for recycling, and it has not separated. There's been no evidence at all of what would be quite a significant amount of fuel in the oil. Like, it's not a trace amount. It's enough to increase, a quarter to a half or so a quart or liter on your dipstick. More than that, obviously, if you drive out with a bunch of short trips and may or may not change your oil frequently enough. So with all that being said, that makes me sleep better at night. Again, I change my oil religiously, even though ordinarily in a car like this, I would do it every 6,000 kilometers or so, because oil's kind of cheap and I don't mind getting under my car. But I've put almost 30,000 kilometers on this car, and I've only done 2 oil changes. And the reason for that is, of course, is that I barely run the ICE. I think I'm probably, if I was to be conservative, I would say I've run about 8,000 kilometers or 5,000 miles on the internal combustion engine, and obviously the rest of that difference on electric only. So 2 oil changes and 5,000 miles, that's pretty aggressive, pretty cautious. So my conscience is perfectly clear there. So anyway, thanks for sticking with me for this long, folks. I hope this was reasonably informative, if this is something you're actually specifically researching. And as always, I always appreciate every watch minute, every subscribe, everything. This is great. I love this silly car, and I love making videos about it. You've heard me say that 1,000 times too, if you've watched some of my other videos. So thank you all. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care, everyone.